Alone in an abandoned shrine deep in the Sahara, Mauro Prosperi tried to end his life before the desert could. But his own extreme dehydration would not let him bleed out. Inside an abandoned shrine in the Sahara, Mauro Prosperi believed he had reached the end. He had entered the 1994 Marathon des Sables as a 39-year-old former Olympic pentathlete. Then a severe sandstorm sent him off course. Lost in the desert, far from the race route, he faced the possibility of a slow death from exposure and thirst. In that state of desperation, he made a decision he later described in stark practical terms. He cut his wrists so that his body might be found and his wife could quickly claim his police pension. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was the act of a man who believed the desert had already decided the outcome. But the attempt did not work. According to accounts of his survival, the reason was physiological, not mystical. Severe dehydration had drained his body of fluid. His blood had thickened and clotted so quickly that he could not bleed to death. In the middle of what he thought was the final moment, his body refused to cooperate. That failure changed the story. If death would not come that way, what was left to do? In the silence of that shrine, the question was no longer how he would die. It became whether he could still choose to keep moving. The Marathon des Sables already carried an extreme reputation, and Prosperi entered it with the background of an elite athlete. The verified record is simple but decisive. During the 1994 race, a severe sandstorm pushed him off course. That single event broke the thin line connecting him to the organized world of checkpoints, competitors, and recovery. In a desert, losing direction is not just a navigational problem. It can become a total collapse of certainty. The Sahara offers almost no visual comfort when orientation is gone. Wind erases tracks, distance is hard to judge. The landscape repeats itself until every horizon looks like the last one. Prosperi was no longer just racing badly or suffering through a hard stage. He was separated from the route entirely. The storm had not merely slowed him down, it had taken away the frame that made the event survivable. That matters because endurance athletes are trained to push through pain when they know where the next marker is. Here, the crisis was different. The usual logic of discipline no longer applied. There was no finish line to calculate toward, no known distance to the next supply point, no reliable measure of how much danger remained ahead. The race had turned into isolation, and still, this was only the beginning of the real ordeal. Before rescue, before the hospital, before the later return that would make his survival feel almost impossible. In hindsight, Prosperi first had to endure the moment when the desert stripped away every assumption an athlete normally relies on. The facts of Prosperi's condition revealed just how far the crisis had gone. He was stranded for days in the Sahara without enough water, and the effects became profound. Severe dehydration depleted his bodily fluids. That same process thickened his blood and caused it to clot rapidly, which is why his suicide attempt failed. What saved him in that one moment was also evidence that his body was nearing collapse. This is the hard contradiction at the center of his story. The same dehydration that placed him in mortal danger also prevented him from bleeding out. It did not make him safe. It showed how extreme his condition had become. His blood chemistry had shifted so far that the body's basic processes were being altered under survival stress. From there, every decision became narrower and more desperate. While stranded, Prosperi drank his own urine. He also killed and consumed raw bats and lizards. One source notes that medical science indicates digesting such items can actually accelerate dehydration and organ failure. That detail matters because survival stories are often retold as if every desperate act in the wilderness is automatically effective. This one was not a handbook. It was a record of what a man did while trying not to die in a place that offered almost nothing. The desert reduced survival to brutal improvisation. There was no clean line between help and harm. What he consumed may have given him some sense of action, some fragile extension of time, but the medical reality remained grim. His body was being pushed deeper into failure. So, the question tightened again. If those measures were not enough, how long could movement alone carry him? Prosperi's ordeal ended only after an extraordinary drift away from the race. According to the BBC account, he strayed 291 kilometers, 181 miles, off the marathon route and crossed from Morocco into Algeria before he was discovered. That number gives shape to the scale of his isolation. He was not a short distance beyond a checkpoint or hidden just over the next dune. He had passed beyond the event itself, beyond the country where the race was being run, and into another nation's desert. The discovery came not from an organized finish line reunion, but from local people who encountered him after that vast dislocation. The verified account states that he was eventually discovered by a Berber shepherd girl. Another source summarizes his rescue in terms of Berber nomads. However described, the crucial fact is that after days of wandering and desperate survival, he was finally seen by people who could end his isolation. That moment is easy to reduce to luck, but luck alone does not capture it. By then, Prosperi had already survived the storm, the loss of direction, the failed suicide attempt, the dehydration severe enough to alter his blood, and days of improvised sustenance that medical science says could worsen the body's decline. Discovery did not erase those days. It came after them. And rescue was not the end of the danger. Being found alive in the Sahara did not mean he had escaped without consequence. In some ways, the true inventory of what the desert had taken from him would only become visible once doctors could measure it. The next chapter of the story unfolds not on sand. Part 1. The medical reckoning, but under clinical light. At the hospital, the scale of the damage became measurable. Doctors found that Prosperi had lost 16 kilograms, 35 pounds. He weighed only 45 kilograms, or 99 pounds. To recover from severe organ damage, he required an intravenous drip of 16 liters of fluids. Those numbers are stark because they translate an almost unimaginable desert ordeal into medical fact. They also tell us that survival did not mean he had somehow escaped intact. The body that entered the Marathon des Sables as that of a former Olympian had been stripped down to an emergency state. Weight loss on that scale is not just a sign of fatigue. It signals the depth of depletion. The need for 16 liters of intravenous fluid points to how profoundly water loss had destabilized him. And the reference to severe organ damage makes clear that this was not only about temporary weakness. Multiple systems had been affected. The earlier choices he made in the desert, drinking urine, eating raw bats and lizards, sit differently when viewed beside that diagnosis. They were not proof of mastery over nature. They were markers of desperation inside a physiological crisis that medicine would later confirm in measurable terms. This is also where the story becomes quieter and in some ways more serious. It is tempting to treat rescue as the triumphant endpoint. But hospital figures resist that simplification. They show that Prosperi's survival was not a sudden clean reversal. The desert had already extracted a heavy price. Recovery would not be a single dramatic moment. It would have to become a longer, slower process. That raises another question the story does not let us ignore. After damage this severe, what does it mean to come back at all? The dossier describes Prosperi's recovery as grueling, lasting 2 years and following extensive liver damage. That detail matters because it stretches the story beyond the desert itself. The most visible crisis lasted days. The less visible one lasted years. A 2-year recovery changes how we understand survival. It means the body did not simply rebound once it had fluids again. The consequences continued. The desert remained present in the form of medical recovery, weakness, and the long work of returning from organ damage. Even with the hospital intervention, after the 16 liters of fluids, after the rescue, after the immediate emergency had passed, there was still no quick return to normal life. This is where many survival narratives grow vague, as if living through the worst moment automatically restores a person to what they were before. Prosperi's story, at least in the verified facts provided here, does not support that. It points instead to duration. 2 years, extensive liver damage, a recovery described as grueling. Those words suggest patience rather than triumph, endurance rather than spectacle. And yet that slow phase is essential to understanding the scale of what followed. If a man survives in the Sahara, reaches a hospital nearly unrecognizable in weight, and then spends 2 years recovering from organ damage, most people would consider the story complete. Survival alone would be enough. There would be no reason to expect anything more. But Prosperi's story does not stop at survival, and it does not stop at recovery. The final turn is not that he lived. Part 2, back to the desert. It is what he chose to do after living through all of this. After that grueling 2-year recovery from extensive liver damage, Mauro Prosperi returned to race the ultramarathon again, and according to the supplied summary, he successfully completed it multiple times. That fact gives the story its final shape. The desert that nearly killed him did not become a place he was defined only by fleeing from. It became the place he went back to face on different terms. There is no need to exaggerate that choice. The verified facts are already enough. A 39-year-old former Olympic pentathlete entered the 1994 Marathon des Sables. A severe sandstorm sent him off course. Lost in the Sahara, he attempted suicide in an abandoned shrine so his wife could quickly claim his police pension. Extreme dehydration had so depleted his fluids and thickened his blood that he could not bleed out. He survived by desperate means, including drinking his own urine and consuming raw bats and lizards. Even though medical science indicates such acts can worsen dehydration and organ failure. He wandered 291 kilometers, crossed into Algeria, and was eventually discovered by a Berber shepherd girl. In hospital, doctors recorded catastrophic weight loss and severe organ damage, treating him with 16 liters of intravenous fluids. Then came 2 years of recovery. What remains after all, that is not a simple lesson. It is a human sequence of breakdown, consequence, and return. The lowest point in the story is not only that Prosperi was lost in the Sahara. It is that he reached a point where he believed death was the more rational option. The turning point is not rescue alone. It begins when the attempt fails and survival, however unwanted in that instant, becomes unavoidable. From there, each step is less about heroics than persistence. His story is often remembered for a physiological paradox. Dehydration prevented him from bleeding out. But the deeper force of it may be this: the body that was failing him in the desert still carried him far enough to be found. And the life he thought was ending in that shrine continued long enough for him to recover and return. Not unchanged, not untouched, but still moving. If this story brought up thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or overwhelming distress, please contact local emergency services or a crisis hotline in your area right away. If you're in the US or Canada, call or text 988. If elsewhere, please reach out to a local crisis line or mental health professional.